Now, on February 6th, 1958, one of the great tragedies to hit English sport and indeed to hit a city, the city of Manchester, happened when a plane carrying the Manchester United team and, of course, many other passengers crashed on takeoff at Munich airport. It was, for those of us alive, one of those moments that you know where you were when you heard the news. Maybe the assassination of John F. Kennedy is another moment. Many of us will remember precisely where we were. The shock was profound. They were a young, brilliant team. They had been champions for 2 years running, and they were coming back from a European Cup quarter-final game against Red Star Belgrade. They're a team wrapped in folklore, and how great they were is a fascinating thought for many people. One of the people most likely to know is John Giles. John was at Manchester at the time and on the day. John, thanks very much for joining us to talk about this terrible tragedy. 8 Manchester United players died, but many who survived never played again. Let me ask you where you were when you heard about the crash.
Well, I was at Old Trafford, Eamon, in the afternoon, because the youth team, which was a separate team, as you know, a very, very successful team, were training that afternoon with old Bob English, a lad called Bob English, who was the trainer. And that was down at Old Trafford. We did a bit of training. We came in, and Bob English sat us down and said, look, there's been a bit of bad news. The plane has crashed. But the impression we got, was that it wasn't serious. At that time, nobody knew anything about it. There was no real news. So I remember walking home back to my digs in Stratford, and when I got in, the news was out at that particular stage that there were quite a few players, quite a lot of people killed on the crash. That's how I knew it was, like everybody else, it was very, very serious.
Yes.
So that's when I first heard about it.
Yeah, I was in a barber shop in Millmount Avenue in Drumcondra having a haircut, and the barber had a radio in the corner. And again, there was just mention of a crash, but no news of fatalities.
Yes.
And now it did emerge in the end that 8 players had died, but there were some extraordinary stories. Matt Busby was in a very, very bad way. Duncan Edwards, who was 21 at the time and who many believe was the greatest English player ever. He certainly was an English international long before he was 21, when he was still a teenager. He had a long fight for his life as well, John. I can only imagine the atmosphere in Manchester, a city that was so proud and has such a great history, and a city that was so proud of this team.
Yeah, it was very sad. Obviously, very, very sad, and it was quite difficult for the lads. Difficult in a way for the lads like myself and that, because what did we do? We were told not to come to the club for 2 weeks, and it was mostly burials for the likes of myself and anybody that was associated with the club.
Yes.
So it was very, very difficult. I think they brought us back to Dublin for Liam Whelan's funeral.
Yes.
So it was you didn't know what to do with yourself, Eamon, to be quite honest. You know.
Yeah.
I was only 17 at that time, and there was nothing to do, and there was nowhere to go. And as you say, the whole city, the whole world actually was shocked.
Yes.
And very, very sad about this whole thing. This young team, this outstanding players, killed in a plane crash coming back from a big game.
Yes.
It was just sad, you know.
And they were known as the Busby Babes. They played with great daring and flair. People who didn't like them, and I remember Bob Lord, who was the chairman of Burnley, who called them teddy boys, which was about the worst insult you could level at a young man in those times. But they were John, and this is what I really want to talk to you about, and I think people will be fascinated by what you can tell us. How good were they? They'd won the First Division twice. They were the first English team to go and participate in the European Cup, as it was then called. And people thought they were almost going to be invincible. Let's have a think about... I want to talk to you first maybe about Duncan Edwards, who had been in the team, I think, since he was 16 or 17. People talk about him in sort of awestruck tones. I remember having a conversation with Bobby Charlton when I was researching my Busby book, and he talked about him in such extraordinary terms. How great was he? How important was he? How dominant? Because he was a physical person as well as a powerful footballer.
Well, Bobby was close to him, and I think they were around about. Bobby might have been a year or so younger than him.
Yes.
Now I only saw him with youngsters' eyes, if you know what I mean. I was only 15 when I went there, so I didn't see as much of them because I was playing myself. But I saw a fair bit of them, and he looked awesome, if that's the right word for me. He was a big lad. He was and he was strong. As you say, I think he played for England when he was 17.
Yeah.
But he had brilliant skills, he could distribute the ball, and he played like a little fella with the balance, but could distribute the ball with both feet. What was then a left half position. He used to play in a left half position, which was a midfield player.
Yeah.
And I think he scored a fair few. When he would have done, he's a good shot on both feet. And that's what I saw of him. And in an outstanding team, Eamon.
Yes.
As we know, they had terrific players. Bobby Charlton was only just getting into the team on a permanent basis at the time around the time of the crash. But Bobby was a sensational player. My first experience of Bobby, I went over when I was 14, and you couldn't go till you were permanently till you were 15. But I used to watch the first team play the second team, and Bobby couldn't get into the game.
Yeah.
Now, there are that many players, but he used to come on at half time. And I thought, what a player this fella is.
Yes.
Like, this is a fella coming on. He can't get in the team,
yeah.
Bobby. And he didn't get into the team permanently until just before the crash.
Yes.
That's how good the team actually was. But I think Duncan, I spoke to Jimmy Murphy about him, who was a great judge of player, just raved about him. He was so young. He was only 21 when the Munich air disaster happened. And I think he would have been... I think he would have been one of the greats. But again, I couldn't analyse him for you, Eamon, in a way that I maybe could today when I got older.
Yes.
But he just looked brilliant, as all the team did.
Yeah, Jimmy Murphy, as you say, was a huge part of the Manchester United story. Not so much to the public, perhaps, but he was the person who did a lot of work with the players and had good relationships with the players, where Matt Busby was a bit more aloof. But he is on the record as saying that Duncan Edwards was the greatest player he ever saw. I want to ask you about Liam Whelan, John, a Dubliner from Cabra. And I actually saw him play, but it didn't really register. I saw them play at Dalymount Park against Shamrock Rovers in the first round of a European Cup. They won 6-0. Dalymount was packed on the night. And God, they looked awesome. Now, and Rovers were a great team then. In League of Ireland context, they were the Manchester United of the League of Ireland. But that night, they were just... Woof. Tell us about Liam Whelan, John. First of all, as a Dubliner, you would have been a bit closer perhaps to him in terms of, recognition and all of that than the English guys.
Well, yeah, I knew Liam reasonably well, Eamon, as a kid. When I first went to Manchester at 14, I was there for 4 weeks, and Tommy Hamilton and Liam Whelan looked after me.
Yes.
And I must have been a total pain in the arse to them, Eamon. I'm terribly worth delighted when I go. But he was very good to me. And then when I signed pro, as you know, you didn't see that much of the first team players.
No.
And I was terrified of them anyway, Eamon. But Liam would always have a kind word. How are you keeping? Are you okay? Are the digs okay? So I liked Liam. He was a very nice fella. Tommy Hamilton at that stage had come back to Rovers because he was called up for the army. but those two looked after me particularly well when I was there for the month. So Liam, I didn't see much of Liam, Eamon, because in those days, there was so many players.
Oh yeah, they're 40.
I was a young fella.
Yeah.
I was lost at that stage. I wouldn't go into the first team dressing room, and most of the lads were okay. Liam was very friendly with me, but he was busy doing his own stuff. But Duncan Edwards, Duncan wasn't friendly.
No.
Eddie Coleman was friendly, really, really friendly. Jackie Blanchflower was friendly. Tommy Taylor wouldn't look at you twice. David Pegg wouldn't look at you twice.
Yeah.
Not that, I was only a young fella, along with a lot of other young fellas. But that was just my take on them at that time. I didn't know them, Eamon.
Liam Whelan as a player, John.
Yeah, Liam, he was an extraordinary player, Eamon. He was the leading goal scorer, I think, for Manchester United when they won the league the previous year, as you say.
Yes.
Scored an awful lot of goals. And he was a midfield player, Eamon.
Yes.
But he wasn't quick. He was a bit on the slow side with a very good technique. But he had this eye for a goal, or the nose for a goal, as they say, as a midfield player.
Yeah.
And Bobby got in the team permanently just before the Munich air disaster. And Liam was only 22.
Yes.
But it was extraordinary the amount of goals he scored. If anybody's listening, they want to look up the goals Liam scored. And he didn't look like a goal scorer, Eamon,
Yes. Yeah.
Like in modern day football, you had Frank Lampard and Stevie Gerrard, who looked like goal scorers.
Yeah.
But Liam didn't. Liam wasn't pacey. His control was very good. His vision was very good. But he wasn't pacey. But if you look at, now this is at a team had Tommy Taylor and Dennis Viollet in the team. And Liam was up there scoring more than them even at that particular time, which was extraordinary,
Yeah, let me ask you about a couple of other players. Actually, I have in front of me here, thanks to one of our key people, he scored 52 goals for Manchester United in 90.
How many appearances?
In 96 appearances.
Yeah.
52 goals in 96, which is absolutely extraordinary.
Extraordinary, I mean, honestly. And he wasn't taking penalties.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like and he was a midfield player.
Yes.
Like you couldn't see Liam it's just that his positional sense was so good, reading the game was so good, it made up for his lack of pace, and obviously his finishing.
Yeah.
But if you watch the match long time, the long periods of the game would go by without Liam being in the game.
Yeah. Now.
Sorry.
No, Brian. I was just going to say another Irishman to talk about. In that great team was Harry Gregg. Now, they bought Harry from Doncaster Rovers, and I think they paid a world record fee for Harry at the time. I think it was around 25,000 or something. You might know the exact sum. But Harry was a friend of ours, as you know. He was still there when I went there. He was the first keeper sweeper, was he, John?
Well, yeah, he was controversial. There was a lot of controversy about him, Eamon, when he played, because he used to be on the edge of the box a lot, and he did get cut out a couple of times as well,
badly.
But that's the way he was. He was the bravest goalkeeper I ever saw, Eamon.
Yes.
Harry. He was unbelievably brave. And then he's brave in the Munich air disaster, as we know. But on the pitch, he was brave. And Harry was, he was friendly with you when you came, and he was friendly with me as well, as friendliness goes with that group of players, Eamon, because there was about 40-odd pros at that time. And you had David Pegg, Duncan Edwards, Tommy, all these super duper stars.
Yes.
And, I was lost among them. But Harry was friendly. I remember the last Shea Brennan was very good to me.
Yes.
Wilf McGuinness was very good to me. In those particular days, where the hello was a big thing from any of them. But Harry was always friendly.
Now,
but very, 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 very brave, and as we all know, extremely brave in the Munich air disaster itself.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to you about Bobby Charlton in a moment, because I know that you think he's the greatest player you ever really saw or played with. I want to talk about Dennis Viollet, John.
Oh yeah.
I thought Dennis Viollet was the most beautiful footballer. Really, 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 really gifted.
Yeah.
And I played when he went at the end of his career. He went to Stoke. You might remember that.
Yes.
And I played against him. Terry Conroy was playing for Stoke at the same time.
Yeah.
We played them in a cup match when I was at Millwall. But watching him, play, because he came back and he survived, and he played again. Tell us about Dennis Viollet. He was beautiful, wasn't he, to watch?
Oh, he's brilliant. Great. Well, I think if he wasn't great, he wasn't far off it, Eamon.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to play with him after the Munich air disaster when he got in the team. And the funny thing about Dennis, before the Munich air disaster, Dennis was a striker playing off Tommy Taylor.
Yes.
You know, that's the way it was in those days. Eamon, he was brilliant. He was quick. He was great positional sense, great goal scorer. If you can look up his goal scoring record. But he was terrific. But what was amazing about Dennis, after the Munich air disaster, when he came back, he played as the link man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh, sorry, no, he played as a striker. He played as a striker.
Yeah,
he played in the Tommy Taylor role.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Now, this was a guy, he wasn't particularly big, he was strong, he was very quick, he was a beautiful player. I'd say he's the most enjoyable players I ever played with, for what it's worth, Eamon.
Yeah.
But the amazing thing about him, that he played off the centre forward before the Munich air disaster, and when he came back, he had to play as the holding player up front, which he did, and did brilliantly. And I was lucky enough. I played with him for a couple of seasons. Actually, the time I got in the first team, which was his 59-60 season, Dennis scored a record number of goals that year.
Yeah,
in a mediocre team, Eamon.
I have his goal scoring record in front of me, thanks to the magic of Google. He scored 179 goals in 293 appearances for United, which is a hell of a haul. Indeed. And the other great thing was his control, one-touch control.
Oh, yeah. He was quick as lightning, Eamon.
Quick as lightning, yeah.
Yeah. He was terrific. I loved playing with him. Actually, when I got into the team first, I was playing on the right wing. And when I get the ball, Dennis would be over to you, you know, and you could play it into him, and then you'd go. But he knew exactly if it was on to release it or hold it and all that. He was just a natural player. And had these qualities, a bit of fire in him too. Eamon, you know, yes. He wouldn't take any nonsense from anybody.
No
opposition or anything. You know, I like Dennis. Dennis was a terrific player.
I want to talk to you about Roger Byrne, John, who was the captain of that team. He died in the air crash. He was a converted winger. Busby converted into left back. He was a huge player in terms of his leadership, I believe. What sort of a footballer was he? What sort of a man? If you have any impression of him, clearly Busby rated him in terms of character and everything else to make him captain.
Yeah. He was a bit older than the other lads, Eamon. Yeah. As you say, I think he started out as a left winger, converted to left back, and he became captain. Like from my perspective, he was always friendly, without being over friendly, and a bit aloof, even with the other lads.
Yes,
he was. I think he was training to be a physiotherapist.
Yes,
Eamon, at that time, which was most unusual for footballers. So he had a bit more about him in certain ways.
Yes,
than the other lads. You know,
I do. Yeah,
I didn't know him very well, but I think the other lads. I got the feeling he wasn't popular with the other lads.
Yeah.
But they respected him.
Yes, of course. Now, Jackie Blanchflower, his more famous brother Danny, of course, is a friend of yours. It was a great player, captain of Spurs, and a huge figure in the game. But Jackie, I interviewed Jackie for a Busby book I wrote. I went to his home. He never played after the crash. And there was a sadness about him, but I thought he was a very gentle and intelligent man and very helpful to me.
Yeah, well, he was another one who was friendly with me, Eamon.
Yes.
You know, he'd have, how you doing? He'd have a bit of a laugh and that. And he was a remarkable player because he played as an old-fashioned inside forward in the Busby Bay time, and then went back and played centre-half for a while.
Yes.
Eamon, which was amazing. He read the game well. Again, not particularly quick. But it was tragic, you know, he couldn't play after Munich air disaster. And I know, like, to his line day, he wasn't too happy about the club, but that's another matter. But as a player, his control was very good. He wasn't quick, but he was a deep-lying midfield player at that particular time with Dennis Viollet and Tommy Taylor up front. And I think Liam replaced Jackie in the team.
Right.
On a permanent basis.
Right now.
And Jackie moved to centre-half then for a while, believe it or not.
Yeah. Another transfer record that Busby broke was to sign Tommy Taylor. I think he signed him from Barnsley, was it?
Yeah, Barnsley,
and he signed him for 29,919 because he didn't want to break the transfer record and have that hanging around Tommy Taylor's neck. Powerful, big player.
Yeah, he was a big lad, strong, and in those days, not so much the big centre forward who held it up. You know.
Yes.
The target man, they used to call him in the old days. You don't see so much of it now. And he was very, very good at it. He was strong. He was quick. He was game. His control wouldn't have been exceptional, and it was okay. But he'd always be in there at the far post, or he'd be always if any of the lads were in trouble at the back to get it up to him to hold it up and bring people into the game. So he served the team really, really well in that base. Very, very good header of the ball,
Right.
Very good header of the ball. Yeah.
Another of the midfield players and one of the favourites, I think, of fans and players alike was Eddie Coleman. Eddie was from Salford, which is, of course, is just about where Old Trafford is, on the border of Salford. You cross a bridge, you're in Salford. A local lad. They used to call him Swivel Hips. I'd love to have seen him play. I can't remember ever seeing him play, but I read so much about his devilment and humour and his way of playing the game.
Yeah, he was a lovely lad. Well, he was one of the lads that was very friendly with me and most other kids as well.
Yes.
Eamon. And as I say, a real chirpy Manchester lad. You know, he's very, very sociable lad, very, very popular with the other lads. And it's amazing because when I first went to Old Trafford I think he was in the army, Eamon, when I went 14, and Jeff Whitefoot was playing in the middle of the field.
Can I just explain that army reference to our listeners? If you were English, you had to do 2 years national service. And that, whether you played for Manchester United or Ragball Rovers, you still had to do the 2 years national service. Sorry, John.
Actually, I mean, if you were 2 years in England as an Irishman, you had to do national service.
Really? I didn't know that. How did you get out of it? Oh,
I just missed it. I just missed it, I was only out by 6 months. That's why Tommy Hamilton, you remember Tommy?
I do, yeah. Tommy's
still alive and well.
Rovers, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's why he came home. Tommy wasn't making it. He wasn't going to be in the first team, and he decided, well, what's the point of staying here? Because he was called up for the army, and he went back then to play for in a brilliant way for Shamrock Rovers. But Eddie Coleman was in the army when I was there at 14, watching the players, and Jeff Whitefoot was playing in the right half position.
Yes,
I thought he was brilliant.
Yes.
Absolutely brilliant, and he was sold, and Eddie got in. Now, to be honest, I thought Jeff Whitefoot was a better player than Eddie.
Yes,
you know, Eddie was.
Was he sold to Forest, John?
No, Eamon. He was sold to Grimsby first.
Really? Wow.
Matt was doing his tricks. He was getting him out of the way. And before the season was over, Eamon, when he went to Grimsby, then Forest bought him.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I thought Jeff was a better player than Eddie. Was a very, very attractive player, Eamon. He had this swivel trick that he had going down the wing, like as he was going to pass it out to the right winger and then pull it inside. He was a very, very good player, but I didn't honestly think he was as effective as Jeff Whitefoot. But that was only my opinion.
Now,
but he was a lovely lad.
Just between us, as we're talking about these young men and this tragedy, we should remember the players who died, John. Can you have them there in your mind? Tell me who they were. Yeah,
very sad. Eddie Coleman, name is 21.
Yes.
Roger Byrne, 28. Jeff Bent, who was a terrific left-back replacement, was 25. Duncan Edwards was 21. Mark Jones was 24. David Pegg was 22. Tommy Taylor was 26. Liam Whelan was 22. And then they had the trainer as well, a fellow called Bert Wally, who was very influential at that time, was also killed in the plane side of the particular crash.
Yeah, David Pegg, John, was a winger. Tell me about him. How good was he?
Good. Well, in those days, all teams had two wingers.
Yes.
And he was a left winger, along with Albert Scanlon, who survived the crash. And you had Johnny Berry on the other side, along with Kenny Morgans, who was a young lad. So David Pegg was a left-footed guy who raided down the left wing. In other words, you always had the width of the pitch to play with, so the likes of Duncan Edwards and Liam Whelan could find these players, and on they would go and do their business and do them extremely well. He was only 21, left-footed, looked excellent, Eamon, like all the Manchester United players at that time did. You had Johnny Berry on the other side, who was an older guy who never played again after the Munich air disaster. Right. When Kenny Morgans was also survived the... Kenny was a young fella.
He was there when I went, John, and he was playing in the reserves. He never recaptured.
No, never got it, Eamon.
And Albert Scanlon was also there when I arrived there. And he also never really recovered.
No, well, I don't think he was in the same class as the other guys, to be quite honest.
Right.
But Kenny Morgans actually got in the first team over Johnny Berry before the Munich air disaster, but never got over it, Eamon, really. Johnny Berry couldn't play again, Jackie Blanchflower couldn't play again, so it was terribly sad with all these young players not even at the height of their career, in my opinion, at that particular time.
Now, John, I want you to tell me, I think people said, and even Busby, who wasn't particularly a boastful man, said they'll win everything for a long time, and that was the general view. What was your view? It must have been wonderful to see this great young team playing attacking football. You know, the way that the way Guardiola does it today, or did it when City were at their peak, or Barcelona at the peak. This was back in the mid-50s onwards. Matt Busby getting a team to play like that, which was really not the way English teams played, was it?
Well, a lot of them tried to do it, Eamon. He just thought he had the players, and he built the players up and got the Busby Babes going, which nobody else had done at that particular stage. So it was unique. So to get the players that he did, like Duncan Edwards, for example, came from the Midlands. He was a Wolves supporter. And Bobby Charlton came from Newcastle, who was a Newcastle supporter. But he got them in because he was the first to do it, to get these a group of these young players, Eamon. Yeah. And I think what happened at that time, which was very clever, I think that you were only allowed to sign 2 players on the club, schoolboys. But what he did very cleverly, he signed them and put them on the ground staff.
Yes.
So he wasn't signing them as players.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the likes of Duncan Edwards and Dan, of course, had the courage to put them in the first team. Yeah. So they were just coming on to their best at that particular time. As you said, they won the league in 55 and 56. And then their biggest competitors that time were Wolves.
Yeah.
And then Wolves won the league in the year the disaster. Wolves won the league that year. United were on top of the league, by the way, when it came to the Munich air disaster. It looked like they were going to win it for the third time on the bounce.
Yes.
Eamon.
Yeah.
But Wolves then won it in 57, 58, and they won it again in 58, 59. Right, and then Burnley won it, and Spurs won it. So I think they would have dominated for at least 10 years. The only thing that teams that could have played against them or done anything against them was the Spurs team of 1961-62 and the Liverpool team in 1964. Because in Wolves, for example, who were their biggest rivals through the 50s, won the cup in 1960 and won nothing again. They were relegated after 2 or 3 years. So it would have been either Spurs, who only lasted 2 or 3 years, Eamon, and Liverpool that could have done them. But if you look at the team at that time, that they were all the young players, Eamon, as we just read out there. They were young. They were a young team. I think they would have needed very little changes in that team, maybe for 10 years. But what we must remember, within those 10 years in the future, they produced Tony Dunn, Georgie Best, Brian Kidd, Johnny Aston, Nobby Stiles, Bobby Charlton. Bobby's only 19. So I think they would have dominated for at least 10 years, Eamon, at that particular time.
Okay, John. It's been really enjoyable talking to you about that. Of course, it's very poignant to think of those young men and to think of the club. But if anyone really ever wants to understand the special place that Manchester United hold in the affections of football fans, it is really much of it derived from that great team and that great adventure that Busby embarked on by defying the FA, defying the Football League and going to participate in the European Cup all those years ago. That's all.
Eamon, can I just interrupt there for a second? because you quite rightly say the FA weren't in favour of doing it. Chelsea had won the league the year before,
and they were threatened, and they backed down,
and they backed out of it.
Yeah.
Busby had the courage to say, "No, we're doing it," and he did go on to do it with tragic results at that particular stage.
Yes.
But he had the courage to go against the feelings of the FA at that particular time. I mean, which was very unusual.
A big and bold decision, and seen in the context of the Champions League and the globalisation of the football world at the moment. A very important seminal moment, really, for English football. So when you talk about Manchester United, you're talking about something special. That's all we have time for. I'm very grateful to John Giles, great player, who was around and saw these great players.